Okay, so as you guys know, I used to work in Congress. I've been a Hill staffer for a long time. Those of you who are subscribers know that, and thank you for subscribing. If you haven't yet subscribed and you just happen upon this video, I hope if you like it, you'll hit that button and help me out. That's how we keep going. So I want to read something. This is what Warren Buffett, he's the retiring chair of the Berkshire Hathaway, what he says. He has a simple fix for a lot of what ails this country with Congress. He says, I could end the deficit in 5 minutes. He said this to CNBC. You just pass a law that says anytime there's a deficit of more than 3% of GDP, all sitting members of Congress are ineligible for reelection. How about that? Job performance could actually matter. The 26th Amendment, granting the right to vote for 18-year-olds, took only 3 months and 8 days to be ratified. Why? Simple. The people demanded it. Keep that in mind. The people demanded it. That was in 1971, before computers, email, cell phones, etc. Of the 27 amendments to the Constitution, 7 took a year or less to become law become the law of the land, all because of public pressure. What we're doing matters. Those protests that you think aren't mattering, they matter. Fair is fair. Now, how does this sound? No tenure, no pension. A congressman collects a salary while in office and receives no pay when they are out of office. Sounds pretty normal. Congress, past or present or future, participates in Social Security. All funds in the Congressional Retirement Fund move to the Social Security Fund immediately. Oh, they won't be cutting it then, will they, folks? All future funds flow into the Social Security system, and Congress participates with the American people. It may not be used for any other purpose. You do not get to raid our Social Security to pay for other priorities that lobbyists are asking you to pay for. So, Congress can purchase their own retirement plan just as Americans do. Congress will no longer vote themselves a pay raise. Congressional pay will rise by the lower of CPI or 3%. Congress loses their current health care system and participates in the same system as the American people. Remember, Congress has this real Cadillac plan. So when they're making laws that hurt our health care, while they're sitting pretty, they don't know what it's like to live as a real person, particularly if they've served in Congress for too long. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Congress must equally abide by all laws they impose on the American people. All contracts with past and present congressmen are void, effective 12/31/2025. The American people did not make this contract with Congress. Congress made all these contracts for themselves, and most Americans don't even know about some of this stuff. Serving in Congress is an honor, not a career. The founding fathers envisioned citizen legislators, so ours should serve their terms and then go home and back to work. So I like a lot of that. I think that when Congress doesn't have to abide by the same laws and systems that they force on us, that's how we get in this mess. That's why it's not so great to have, a Donald Trump as president. People say, well, you want a good businessman as president. Well, there's difference between a good businessman like a Mitt Romney and a bad businessman who's a con and a liar and a cheat and a fraud and a convicted felon like Donald Trump. So that's all he knows. That's the only way Donald Trump can win. I'm remembering years and years and years ago when I was a young Hill staffer, I went to some event and then Congressman Amo Houghton was the speaker. He, at the time, I believe, was a freshman member of Congress, but he didn't get into Congress till he was, I think, 65 years old. Now, he is of the family, his family business was the Corningware business. So they were very, very successful. He knows a little bit about that. And I thought it was really interesting. He was, by the way, is a Republican from New York State, and he was considered one of those rhinos, as was I. Back then, that was the majority of the Republican Party, what they now call rhinos. I don't even think we had that term back then. It was the norm. There were some fringy right-wing nutcases, but it's like, I guess we're forced to deal with them. I guess they're part of the coalition, right? But Amo Houghton said something that I have never forgotten because it made so much sense. And I was a young person at the time. And at that time, there was this preponderance. It was starting to happen more and more and more where you'd have very young people getting elected to Congress. Now, we know that you have to be 25 years old. That's fine. But should you be only 25 years old? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So Amo Houghton said, he says maybe because he had, been in Congress for a year or so there and noticing these really young people. And I think what we were noticing is okay, there's one thing to have ambition in life and professional ambition, and even some political ambition. But getting in when you're really, really young, there are exceptions to the rule, of course, like an AOC. But overall, what he was noticing is yes, there are exceptions, and you do want that representation. But when it becomes like a career ambition to be the youngest member of Congress or something, then it becomes about you rather than about the job. And he said something that made sense. And again, there are exceptions to the rule, but he said Congress should mostly be comprised of people who have gone out and done something with their lives first. And that made a lot of sense to me because at that time I had noticed some young people getting into Congress who, I don't know, it was a bit much. Kind of like, really? I mean, like when you look at a Matt Gaetz or something like that. But what Amo Houghton was saying is, go work your way up through the state legislature first. Go run a business. Be a teacher. Be a member, a contributing member of your community. Raise a family. Win some things, lose some things. Know what it's like to do both. Succeed, fail. Um, serve on your city council. Be a mayor. All these types of things. Know what it's like to be an employee and an employer. Before know where tax. Here's what he said. He said, know where taxes come from. Learn where taxes come from before you're in a position to decide how they're going to be spent. And there was a lot of wisdom in that. So I am all for excellent people who get in when they're young and they've already had some achievements and impact, like an AOC. But a Matt Gaetz, people like that, I don't think so. And then you look at a dangerous moron who's got some real moral and intellectual issues, like Marjorie Taylor Greene. Um, would she ever have been ready for Congress? I don't know. Maybe if she had gone out and made her mistakes in places where she couldn't have such a negative impact and learned some lessons, maybe as an older person. I worked for a man who got into Congress when he was 65 years old, Roscoe Bartlett of Maryland. He had raised a family, had 10 children. He had a farm. He had provided Section 8 housing for people, underprivileged people. He had had several businesses. He had a number of patents. He had been a scientist. He had gone out there and done some things so that what he brought to Congress, whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him, and I worked for him and I disagreed with him on some things, but I knew that what he was doing was coming from a place of lifelong experience. And that was important. That was important. Uh, I think, it's one thing we revere veterans as we should, but when they're in Congress, it's not just they're there as our heroes. I think it's important that we really think about their life experience as a veteran, if they were combat veteran, what they experience, what they bring to the table, the perspective. So that, say, if they're on the Armed Services Committee and they're in a position to maybe to do some appropriations on defense spending, they're really thinking about how these weapon systems are going to be used and who's going to be operating them and who could die if something goes wrong, or if we're cutting corners, or if we're making some of these decisions based on lobbyists and who's stuffing checks into the pockets of congressmen. We have suffered in quality in members of Congress greatly. There's always going to be bozos and idiots and morons. But when you've got too many of them, we end up in a situation like we're in now. And right now, we have members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, who know exactly what Trump is, and they're afraid of him, and they're afraid of losing their seats, so they won't do their jobs. Those are the people we don't need in Congress. And I would say the same for Democrats, too, who are afraid of Trump and didn't want to do the hard thing, didn't want to stand up to him, didn't want to impeach him. Just like Merrick Garland didn't want to do his job. So when the status and the personal ambition of these people, or maybe they want to stay in long enough to get the cushy benefits and the retirement benefits, when that becomes the driving force, that's when we need to change the system. So I think a lot of what Warren Buffett had to say is interesting and should be considered. The problem is Congress themselves won't do it, so it has to be us. If we survive and are able to rebuild after this era of Trump and this destruction, maybe that's what we'll have an opportunity to do when it's all torn down and broken apart and we are rebuilding. Let's keep in mind that we need to have some checks and balances in place that's going to come from we the people, not from Congress deciding that they get pay raises and they get to live under a different and better and Cadillac system than we do. I don't know if it'll happen in my lifetime, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And again, every once in a while, that thing that the late Amo Houghton said about go out and do something in life, learn some things, have the family, be a teacher, be a parent, be a member of your community, work your way up, know where taxes come from before you're in a position to decide how they're going to be spent. I like that. So I hope we can all keep that in mind in the event that we one day have a chance to really fix this.